Good afternoon, everyone watching from your homes and offices across the state, in our cities, and across the nation that have tuned in. Welcome to ARC's weekly fireside chat. Today we'll be discussing freedom and safety over profits and how Prop 25 ends cash money bail. We have some amazing people, as we always do, that have joined. But before I introduce them, I'd like to go through a few instructions for everyone that's watching. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, if you're on a computer, you'll see a ribbon that has different icons. One icon says chat. And if you'd like to be able to communicate directly with our panelists, you can put your questions in the chat. And then we also have an icon that says Q&A. Same thing, if you'd like to ask a specific question, please put your specific question in the Q&A and we will answer it as time permits. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our amazing guests and have them each introduce themselves. So we have Senator Robert Hertzberg of California, our California State Senator, the Majority Leader, Jessica Bartholow, Policy Advocate, Western Center on Law and Poverty, Michael Mendoza, ARC's own National Policy Director, and Esteban Nuñez, our ARC Director of Advocacy. Welcome, everyone. And can we start off with Senator Hertzberg? Could you introduce yourself, take a minute or two, and tell us a little bit about yourself for those viewers that don't know you?
Well, I'm one of 5 sons born here in Los Angeles, a native of Los Angeles. And I had a dad who was a constitutional lawyer who always fought for the underdog, who was a guy when Native American communities were 82% unemployment, took the case to the United States Supreme Court when women couldn't be bartenders, when Chinese people were thrown in jail for acupuncture, always engaged in that, which informed my thinking about fighting for the underdog. And I served as Speaker of the California Assembly before Esteban's dad a few years before, and came back to the government really to deal with these tough kind of issues. I started out when I came back working on all the Ferguson cases, always in partnership with Jessica, who's sitting here in this call. And 5 years ago, went back to the White House, Department of Justice, in this long march to end this injustice of money bail. It's a very important issue to me and forms the foundations of who I am and why I'm in government.
Thank you, Senator Hertzberg. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your service. Jessica, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Western Center on Law and Poverty, please?
Sure. Thanks, Sam, and thanks to the entire Anti-Recidivism Coalition community for having us. Western Center on Law and Poverty is one of the poverty law centers that works in the state and federal government to try to address poverty. We provide support center work for the legal services throughout the state. So we take their calls, their problem cases, and try to provide technical assistance to that and look for longer term systemic solutions to the problems they're seeing, and work hand in hand with community members throughout the state on issues related to poverty. I grew up in poverty and since then have worked over 20 years in anti-poverty organizing and policy work.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, and thank you for the service that you've given to our communities, and thank you for joining our show. Michael, could you introduce yourself, and could you tell us a little bit about your advocacy work here at ARC, and specifically around SB 10?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Well, first of all, I'm just excited to be back at ARC as the Director of National Advocacy. You know, I can remember just a few years back as the Policy Director working on SB 10, and how monumental that was, even for me being formerly incarcerated, and understanding how important it was and our goal at that time, the most important goal that still is today, which was ending cash money bail, period. And so I'm excited to be back in this capacity to continue to support the reasons why SB 10 continues and remains a critical legislation, and why we should vote yes on Prop 25.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Michael. And welcome back. Welcome back, brother. And Esteban, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your policy work here at ARC?
Yeah, so, you know, I paroled 4 years ago in 5 months. You know, as the senator stated, my father was in politics. I never in my life would have thought I would ever be in politics, but, you know, with my experience in the being incarcerated, I just saw so many wrongdoings. I saw just so many people that really just needed representation and needed to have a voice. And so when I came home, I dedicated myself to this work. You know, as it pertains to SB 10, it was in my life when I was life coaching that I really just was made aware of the horrifying stories between pimps and young women, and bail agents, and how bail agents would take these young women straight back to their pimps, and how they're still having to shoulder the burdens of those bail schedules. And it's just those horrifying stories really drove me to be in SB 10, and now Prop 25, because we have to rid our system of the toxicity that is really intertwined in it.
Thank you so much, Esteban. Thank you for joining us. And we'd like to talk a little bit more about that experience you had as a life coach prior to being more involved in policy. But first, Senator Hertzberg, could you share with us, what is SB 10, and did you find it difficult to enact bail reform when we presented SB 10 to the legislature?
A big fat yes to the difficulty problem part of it. You know, I had a conversation with a gentleman named Howard Berman, who was in the Assembly from 1972, I believe, to 1982 when he went to Congress. And he tried bail reform back in 81 and told me, Hertzberg, you're crazy to try it. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. So it's been extraordinary. You know, I've done a lot of big fights over the years and a lot of initiatives, got a number of initiatives on the ballot in addition to bail this time around, but nothing's ever been like this. And you know, the idea of SB 10, you know, for me, my dad, as some of you have heard, in addition, when he first came to Los Angeles, he wouldn't no big law firms would hire Jews. So he became a jailhouse lawyer, and he spent a lot of time taking care of folks. And back in those days, you give $100 to the clerk and you come back, you know, as bail, and you come back and you get your $100 back. You didn't lose it like you do today. And it was a good system. It worked to get people to come back because they wanted to get their $100 or $200 back. Literally, that's what it was back in those days. But the system has become like a what do they call it? This whole kind of what's this money system of I'm trying to think of the words slip in my mind. You know, like these. What do you, Jessica? What, you know what I mean? The money lenders. What do you call them? The predatory lenders.
Yeah,
predatory lenders. And so these people are putting up these huge amounts of bail. There's no constitutional rights to people who put up the money. And it's become this insurance industry monster, just a monster. And the one example that Esteban mentioned is one of many. I saw cases when I was working on the issues of Ferguson, where, I mean, literally Ferguson was about these cities trying to basically pay for their budgets off the backs of poor people. You go from city to city and they'd give you a traffic fine for everything. And ultimately, I found one case where a clerk came into my office on the SB 10 case, on the SB 10 bill, trying to talk about how bad it was. And she goes, look at this rap sheet. I said, okay, from Ventura County. I said, let's look at the rap sheet, okay? Look at all these violations. And I went back to the original violation, and the person had a tail light that was broken. They did not go back to court because they missed their court date or whatever it was. Their driver's license was suspended because they didn't show up in court. Then they went and got pulled over for something else 2 years later. And as a consequence, they got thrown in jail because they were driving without a valid license. Their car gets towed. They get put in jail with a bail that they couldn't afford to get out. Their whole life is turned upside down. And the reality, what we learned was, in the simplest ways, and I'll just end here and we'll talk about it later, but literally you can text somebody. You don't have to ruin their lives. The whole purpose behind bail is someone is accused of something, but they're not convicted. How do you make sure that they're going to show up in court, right? That's really its purpose. And by texting them, we found, by looking at different states and different counties in California that uses texts, people show up. They're not leaving because they're going off to some country that doesn't have an extradition treaty because they got a drunk driving ticket or some other issue. They're not showing up because they got something in their family or their job or their kids was sick or something else may be the case. And the level at which you avoid failures to appear is extraordinary. And the impact and justice and the impact upon communities and poverty, and bottom line is it sets up a system, and just end here, that literally your liberty is determined based upon your ability to pay, not based upon your threat to society or your willingness to return. And it was just absolutely out of control, billions and billions of dollars being made by these industries, and these kinds of insidious relationships that were happening that were just hurting people for all the wrong reasons. And we didn't need to do it. And so that was the real basis for doing this.
So let me ask you this, Senator Hertzberg. So bail has been around for quite some time. When was the last time bail reform was enacted, and what was the outcome in California?
Well, that was in 1981. It was a 5-year pilot project relating just to misdemeanors because Howard Berman couldn't get it passed. And after 5 years, nothing's happened in California, nothing. And, wow. and in the meantime, the average cost of bail, $50,000. That means if you put up bail at 10%, that's $5,000, right? Who's got $5,000 to put up a bail for? Many of these things are minor deals. And what happens is this just became a tool to keep people in jail. We know that 63, sometimes some people say as much as 69% of the people that are held in jail are pretrial detainees, many of whom don't need to be there, whose lives don't need to be turned upside down and ruined for a system that doesn't achieve its objectives. Are society safe? Are people showing up? And it ends up costing us a ton of money and creating the most unjust system you can imagine. It's really horrible.
Okay, I'd actually like all of this next question. I'm gonna direct it first to you, Senator Hertzberg, but would like all of our panelists to speak to it, and I'll also speak to it from my personal experience. I've heard many people, they have concerns with the risk assessment. I call it the boogeyman because no one knows, or there's been no actual results where people can say, well, this has happened. Everybody is saying, well, this might happen, or that might happen. And so could you tell us more about the risk assessment tool that will replace the current bail system? And are there any drawbacks using an algorithm that can determine a person's risk to society?
Well, let me try to broadly answer that because it's a pretty heavy question you just asked. The reality is this. The first thing is if you have, and I want Jessica to talk a lot about this because she was a really important part of this element of this bill. If you're sitting down and you didn't, certain kinds of minor infractions and minor things that you literally could get stuck in jail for a long time, you're immediately assessed and released. The idea that you're basically given a price list for your liberty. Here's what you're charged with. Here's how much cost it'll get out. That's completely gone. And if the assessment literally through a pretrial agency can make a determination, and a large number of people are going to be processed there and their lives won't be ruined, and they'll come back to court because we're going to send them a text to do so. The assessment tool is really a tool for judges to look at. Currently, we have 58 counties in California. 47 of those counties currently have these tools. These tools are all different. They're not really calibrated, right? So when we look at Prop 25, what does Prop 25 say? Prop 25 says if you're going to use an assessment tool, it has to be validated by the Judicial Council. That Judicial Council, one of the people, which is one of our great victories, that's part of that validating tool, has to be an expert in bias. Until that tool is validated, it can't be used. Okay? And then subsequently, we've passed SB 36, which makes sure there's no bias in the system and continually gathers the data. So if you don't pass SB 10, you've got 47 counties that have these crazy tools that exist today. If you pass SB 10, if you argue against the tools, you're going to get a validated tool and a process that includes people on bias and a process that deals with the issue of making sure there's no bias in the system. So going to your point about being a boogeyman, it's exactly the issue. And lastly, I would suggest that the purpose of government is to continually improve things. What are we doing in bail? As you said, bail has existed forever. It's mentioned in the Constitution because the king used to hold people in jail and never let them out because they set their bail so high. The theory was that during this period, if you could put something up of value, you'd show up and have a trial by your peers. So it's been around forever. And the reality behind this, in my view, is that this assessment tool and where we're at is that we pass SB 10. And to the extent we see how it works, if it's not working properly, there are some issues that are legitimate criticism that we couldn't get done. We fix it. That's what legislatures are for. That's what we do. We learn and we grow. Bail wasn't this kind of problem when my father was practicing law in the 40s because it wasn't expensive. It became expensive and became this big industry for insurance companies. Now it's become something that's a big deal. We've now figured a way forward. And guess what? That's what we do in government. Next year and next year and next year, we're going to make it better and better and better. But if we don't pass this, we're going to be back to the old system of here's a price list for your liberty in the most unjust system you can imagine with the most unjust people operating it.
Thank you, Senator. Jessica, could you weigh in on your take on the assessment tools?
Sure. Let me say first and foremost that I was among the very first people to be concerned about the assessment tools. When we sat with the group of sponsors at the very beginning, and I said, wait a second, why can't we just get rid of money bail? Why can't we just eliminate it altogether? And we don't have to have anything in replacement. Working on systems related to poverty, you get to see a lot of screening and assessment tools. They take all the data from the person who's for, right? It's my data, it belongs to me, it's about me. It's taken by a third party used for purposes going to be even sometimes beyond what you want that data for. And so in my career, in my lifetime, I've fought against these kinds of data tools. But was come to, the very first kind of introduced version of SB 10, the very first vision of SB 10 was that we would be bringing in, basically keeping these assessment tools that were already in place in over 30 counties, and that nothing we could do, was going to eliminate that. What we really needed to do was to show that money bail, in order for money to bail to go, we had an alternative. To determine whether or not somebody was going to be safe to themselves and the community if released. And in order for us to get something through the legislature, but also to rein in the existing assessment tools, SB 10 included the assessment tools. And I've come to appreciate, over the time that from the introduced version of the bill, which a lot of people supported with that vision of assessment tools replacing money bail, through to the end, the role that we can play as in the state body, right? Because by having the state laws that you heard Senator Hertzberg talk about, we now can have oversight, we can have accountability of these assessment tools that are already in place across the state. And we can make sure that they're tracking for bias and that they're held accountable for not having bias. And if Proposition 25 doesn't pass, those risk assessment tools won't go away. As you said, Sam, people kind of treat this risk assessment tool as the boogeyman. Well, the boogeyman's already out there and we have no way of holding it accountable if we don't pass Proposition 25. And if we pass Proposition 25, we also get to take away the real boogeyman, who is the money bail industry. These guys profit off of people being, determined, their value being determined based on their income. Right now, we have a presumption of detention based on wealth, and that is, and that's endorsed by our state government, and that's what Proposition 25 will do. Is it will bring in accountability to these risk assessment tools. It will make sure there's no bias. We'll have the continuing and ongoing work, hard work of making sure that happens and holding it accountable if it doesn't. But we'll be doing that in an environment where we don't have the bail industry paying for the Board of Supervisors races, paying for the district attorney's races, paying for the sheriff's races, and for elected officials at our state government. So the table will be reset, and reset with the power of people impacted by the systems being more significant because it won't have to fight up against the money bail industry.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So for our viewers, as you can see, this is actual data, both data and documentation of what money from the bail industry is used for, including bounty hunters. Last year in California, just California alone, the profits, not the expenses, just the profit of the bail industry was about $560 billion. That's the money that they walk away with and put in their pocket or use for campaigns, for different political officers, or even some of the laws that many advocates that are probably listening to this right now to go against those pieces of policy. That will be posted also in our chat box, the link that you just saw. Please copy and paste it so you can read it when you have time. But Michael, I'd like you to weigh in a different way. So we actually got a question, and we were discussing this earlier about Kentucky, New Jersey, and other places. But I want you to weigh in on that as how it looks nationally, SB 10 and Prop 25, and your personal experience, because you and I as lifers had to both go through a risk assessment. And I actually ended up going through 7 risk assessments because I found a way to demonstrate that it was the human being that applied the risk assessment that was actually the person that skewed it one way. And I had 3 different people actually apply a risk assessment. 2 out of the 3 found me to be low. But I'd like for you to share your personal experience in terms of risk assessment as being a former life prisoner, and more importantly, as the National Director of Advocacy, the research you've done, the work you've done here in comparison to New Jersey and Kentucky.
Wow, Sam, no pressure, huh? No, honestly, let me first just say a yes on Prop 25 means that we get to end money bail in California, which is huge. I mean, when we look at the rest of the country, a 2019 report out of Harvard stated that, one, there's not a lot of research and data, first of all, in terms of, the use of risk assessments, because I wanted to talk about that a little bit. In terms of the rest of the country, we have states like Washington, D.C., Kentucky, both who are known as kind of like the forefathers of bail reform in other states, right? DC, in this same report from Harvard, from 2012 to 2016 in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, they do include a risk assessment in their reforms, 80 to 90% of folks released would always come back, were not arrested for another crime, and this is based on their reforms. Kentucky, after Kentucky passed their reforms, including a risk assessment, 1 year later, there was a less than 20% decrease in jail population a year later after New Jersey. Let me correct that, after New Jersey. So New Jersey is another important state that folks should look at in terms of pretrial reform that includes a risk assessment. There are not that many states. California would probably be one of the 4th ones to do it statewide. But I also want to mention like New York. Recently New York was another attempt to reform bail in another state. Unfortunately, the bail industry still exists in New York, even with their attempts. Talking to our colleague, Kalira Cumberbatch, recently of New York's 390 for Justice, now at the Criminal Justice Council, and he was telling me about how hard that battle in New York was. And unfortunately, there was a law that rolled back some of their wins in New York. One of the most important wins would have been to allow to make sure that judges give a reason as to the amount of bail that would be set for folks with violent crimes. Also having to show justification and ensure that people would have ability to pay when they would set a bail amount. So even in New York, the bail industry still exists. So in California, a yes on Prop 25 will not only end money bail, but it would be a good nudge for the rest of the country to show them that a state can do it and should do it, because as our leader, Senator Hertzberg and Jessica have already stated, the money bail industry has been a predatory bail industry that takes advantage of poor people and people of color simply because they cannot pay. And I know that from my own experience being incarcerated at the age of 15, where I was tried as an adult with over $1 million bail that I could not buy at that age or at that time or afford. And so, it's an unfair practice that we definitely need to do away with. And California can step up. Our voters can step up to their plate by saying yes on Prop 25 and any money bail.
Thank you, Michael. Esteban, I have a question for you. So in terms of SB 10, what was SB 10 actually modeled after? Because in our chat box, I'm seeing where they're saying that initially the risk assessment tools were not part of the bill. But what exactly was modeled after? And most people don't realize that it was actually modeled after a county in California already. And correct me if I'm wrong there.
No. So it was modeled after Santa Clara County. And there was a report in 2016 that came out on Santa Clara County's pretrial pretrial just services, and 99% of the people that went through went back to court. 95% of the people that went through it did not reoffend. And I think that speaks to the successes of, like, we modeled SB 10, well, the senator modeled SB 10 around Santa Clara, and those are like staggering statistics, right, and percentages of people not only going back to court, but not reoffending. And I think that speaks to just the what happens when we rid our system of having a financial tie to freedom and liberty, right? Like, people will show up. You just have to give them an opportunity. And I think we're never going to allow that opportunity to occur if we have bail in the conversation or in the picture.
I just want to add on to what Esteban said here, and also Amelia's question that she asked in the chat box. When I went back to Washington, D.C. in 2015 during the Obama administration, the first time at the White House, the second time at the Department of Justice, everybody thought risk assessment tools was part of the equation. And the underlying theory was, it did, and I had a debate with the folks in the bail people, and one of the people on it was a judge, and the judge was offended, saying, look, I get to make a decision. It's one factor. The idea is you can look at a judge in the eye instead of just being determine your liberty based upon a bail schedule. But it is always in the discussion. It was in every draft of the bill that lasted 2 years. We introduced the bill in 2017, I think it was, Jessica, and then we had all of 17, and we passed it in 18. And only in the last couple of weeks did the ACLU come out with a report criticizing assessment tools. So it wasn't something that the advocacy community, all of us together, looked at as one of the small levels of factors. We were focused, as Jessica was saying, was getting these people out who shouldn't be in jail, particularly poor people and people of color. It was ridiculous, but it only became an issue later on. And so the idea, Amelia, was it was always part of it in every draft from the beginning, and only did we ever have a question, was literally, maybe I think it was like a month, you guys, before we actually passed the bill. That was number one. Number two, I wanted to say that I think it's really important about SB 10 that is unlike anything. When I went with John Bowders from CJS back to Kentucky, these guys had like bail was like $500. Can I say a fun story? Can I say this, Sam? So I wanted to know, how is Kentucky so progressive on bail, right? Well, apparently a fellow who was a state senator got in a beef with the bail industry, and that state senator got elected to be governor, and then he zets the bail industry and wanted to change up the game. It's kind of always the human story behind this, because I said, how is it that Kentucky happened? So, but the thing about Kentucky is, after we were in the court, sitting with the judge at the bench, going through this, just to feel what it was like, we then went out of town and met with the court administrator. And what the court administrator told us is, yeah, well, they only charge him $500 for bail, or whatever it was, some small amount of money, but we charge them $1,000 to monitor them because we've got to pay for the administrative services. What we did in California that nobody does, which is the principle, you should not pay for your liberty. You have no costs associated with this, because otherwise people would be charging you. Counties would find ways to charge you for this. I think that is a huge piece of why this is valuable. And again, what's the binary decision? Vote yes or vote no on SB 10. You vote no, and it goes back to the old system. You got this horrible place with assessment tools. You vote yes. Yeah, there's no question. I've talked to a lot of advocates who've been very smart, and their attitude was, we need to make some fixes. I don't disagree with them. But we live in the world of the possible. This was the hardest thing I've ever done. I've been in politics since Ronald Reagan was governor. I've been sued 4 times personally. I've had them come to my house 27 times. They put tags on my car. They ran a bail agent against me. They had vans running around against me. I mean, it's the most amazing thing. And the tougher they got, the more dug in I got. And it just made me feel the more just nature of this cause. And so the bottom line is that this is such an important decision for everybody. And I think that when you read, the last thing I'll share is that the bail industry says that half their business comes from California, of all their profits. If we can kill them off here, then I think we have a big impact in having a benefit across the country.
Thank you.
I just want to reinforce that part that it's no money bail and no monetary costs of release. We're no longer going to tell you whether or not you get out depends on how much money you have. And that was a huge kind of very late victory. And a shout out to the grassroots on that some of the people that had to leave the coalition in the end because they couldn't be with us to the very end, they also fought really hard throughout the legislative process to get that no monetary conditions of release. To the senator's credit, holding that that goal to the very end and getting it in there is a huge victory if we pass Prop 25. That means that once you get out, if any pretrial monitoring, you don't pay for, as should be. And so that's really exciting, as well as the estimated by the Public Policy Institute of California, 170,000 people that will be reduced in the jail size throughout the state. Just think of the money that we'll save and we can use towards human development and human rights rather than in our jails.
Thank you, Jessica. Esteban, I have a question for you and then a question for the entire group. But first, in our chat box, Dolores says that it seems like we're talking about tickets and things of that nature. What happens for a person that has a robbery? So there's the group of people that are arrested, that may have been arrested for nonviolent crimes like tickets. What happens to them? How do they get out? How long does it take? And then if a person comes in, let's say for a robbery or an attempted murder or a murder, and I'll be the first to tell you, when I was arrested for murder, I never had a bail. So even if SB 10 existed, you wouldn't get a bail. And most people that I know were not given bail. And then the other part, for most violent crimes like robbery, assault, and things of that nature, you fall into a bail schedule that varies from county to county. And so let's say it's robbery with great bodily injury. Your bail could be somewhere $200,000. And once it gets to a certain level, you have to pay the 20%, which is about $20,000, and you have to have property to put up. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have anybody that has $20,000 just give away because you don't get that money back, and a piece of property to put up that the bail industry will put a lien on if that money if that bill is not paid, you abscond. But to the question, Esteban, there's a population and we're trying to expand it. What happens to them? How quickly are they released? And then what happens as the crimes progressively are more serious or violent?
And the senator could probably articulate this a lot better, just given his legal background. But when somebody goes in, if they fall within the misdemeanor bucket, there's only 10 carve-outs. If they fall within that bucket, they're released within 12 hours. The weekends included, after hours, all of that. If they have a medium to high risk, they then would go in front of a judge. The judge would take the risk assessment into account. Like, that's not the gold standard. It's taken into account. I think the one thing, like you alluded to it, and the one thing to notice, like, we are treating individuals as individuals and we're seeing them as individuals. And that's what the judge is doing, as opposed to a blanket policy or a blanket bail schedule for everybody. I bailed out. I had 7 family members put up their houses to bail me out. I was on ankle monitor when I was bailed out. But I'll tell you, when I worked on SB 10, like, again, bail reform to me was not about, like, I deserved to have been charged with what I was charged with. Like, I had it coming. I think of bail reform as, like, this is for the people who are racially profiled. This is for the people who did no wrongdoing, who were on their way to work and got pulled over and arrested for a busted taillight or some bullshit. And end up losing their job. Their kids end up in the foster care system. Like, that's what bail reform to me is about. It's not about, I mean, and to your point, like, we can always go back and change things. I mean, this is a systemic overhaul. Like, you have to have compromise. I mean, we've, unfortunately, like, that's just the way the legislature works. Like, there's no perfect policy. I think we're all human beings, right? Like, that's a part of being human. But what we do together collectively, like, when we're unified, we can come up with better solutions, right? Like, I think that the important thing here is, like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Like, this isn't perfect, but let's not forget about, like, the real enemy here. And the real enemy here is the cash money bail system that profits off the backs of minorities. And in a time where, and Jessica can speak to this probably better than I can, but in a time where we are really looking for economic justice, it doesn't get any better than this. Like, we eliminated 23 fees associated to the criminal justice system. this would be like removing the cash bail industry from the criminal justice system. So I don't know, Senator, or anybody else want to chime in on this in specifics?
The specific, Senator, and Jessica, could you, so 12 hours, I get arrested for busted tail light or felony vandalism or misdemeanor vandalism. I'm in the county jail. Do I see a judge or am I released with a court date? How does that work?
Yeah, you're basically going to see if it's a minor matter that you're muted. It says, am I still muted? No, you can hear me, Sam? Yeah. So if it's a minor offense, basically what happens is you will, within 12 hours, I mean, think about this. Under the old system, you're sitting in jail. You don't have any money, you're sitting in jail. Mr. Humphreys, with his $5 bottle of cologne, whatever it was, sat in jail for 353 days. You know, you're sitting in jail until you get a court date. Under this system, you'll see a clerk usually, and the clerk will just do a release and give you a court date, and will text you to make sure that you come back. If it's a medium level crime, you go before, as Esteban was saying, you go before a judge. And that's the key thing. Instead of just being treated like a number, you can tell your story. You get treated like a human being. If it's a tough crime, you're not getting out anyway, because if it's murder or if it's a superly tough crime and stuff like that, either A, the bail is set so high that you can't afford to get out, or B, it's a non-bailable. There's a couple of situations in California where it's a non-bailable offense. But the key is then you will get to fast court date to be able to make a determination as to whether you should be released and get treated like a human being and get treated fairly and be able to make your case, versus sitting down and just saying, I don't have the money. I don't have relatives with 7 houses that can put their houses up to pay my bail, or the money in your case, Sam, or whatever the case may be. What's worse than that? And all the other consequences. But the real impact is going to be, hey, there's your puppy in the back there, Mr. Nuñez. Is the poor folks whose lives are turned upside down. And what we saw in Santa Clara, where you're getting 99% of the people coming back, nobody's committing any recidivism, and you're saving a lot of money, and you're not ruining people's lives based upon a money bail system.
Thank you, Senator Hertzberg. Jessica, would you like to add anything to that?
Just, just to say that was the experience of my family is, being arrested on minor crimes. My mom arrested for a hot check, obviously not having the money to pay what she was paying for with the check that didn't work. We didn't have the money for bail. We didn't have a phone at our home. And so she just didn't come back home. She didn't have, she was the person who brought food home every day. We didn't have money for food for the week. She worked, kind of day by day. And so we didn't have food. I was home with my father and my sister, and my father, who had a mental health disability that was significant, and drug addiction. And so without my mom there, it was scary. And she shouldn't have been held for that. It didn't help us that she was held for that, and that a family member had to come and bail her out when they finally got a hold of them. And my uncle, he died at a very young age of 54, a Native American man, and he had 32 warrants for his arrest for minor crimes like camping or loitering, or panhandling. And he'd usually plead guilty because he had panhandled and he had, camped. But when he was arrested for bicycling while intoxicated, he didn't do it. He said, I wasn't intoxicated, and it was wrong for them to do that, and they were harassing me. So he refused to plead guilty for that. The judge, who at the time was Cantil Sakaui from the Sacramento court system, who's now our Chief Justice, she lowered his bail all the way to $2,000. I think she thought he'd know somebody who had $200 to get him out, who had a piece of that to get him out, and he didn't. We were, scattered. Our family was homeless and scattered across the state, and we didn't have each other. And so he stayed in that jail for 118 days. He got beaten up. His health was very poor because of it. He lost all of his things because he had been homeless. He lost everything he had. And that's the kind of thing that people, that won't happen to people anymore. and then, so I just wanted to kind of put a human touch to that, and why these kinds of stories coming in, our co-sponsors, SEIU, they represent caretakers, and it was a big goal of their caretakers, because their caretakers would get picked up, as Esteban said, on like a minor charge, something, their car, not having registration for their car, they'd get arrested, and then they wouldn't come home, and the person that they were caretaking would be put in an institution, and they couldn't get them back. So, so this is the kind of inhumane outcomes we also hope to see eliminated with the passage and vote your vote on Proposition 25.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So in the chat box, and this one is for both Michael and Senator Hertzberg. Senator Hertzberg first. So the concern is about the design and abuse of the risk assessment. So the question to you is this, and I'll share, many people are not aware, I think it was Prop 36 in 2019 that was passed. So if this risk assessment is just horrible, how do we know that? What do we do? What are the answers to that? And what is your commitment to making sure that we get this right?
Well, the answer to the question is, you know, look, we had to compromise, as Esteban was saying, on some stuff, because ultimately a lot of this that was done was with Jerry Brown relied on the court systems, and Chief Justice Kantil Sakaue, who she referred to, has been a great champion on bail. But at the same time, you know, one of the arguments, and I'm sensitive to this, don't disagree, that some judges will be worried about, oh my God, I might get recalled or I might get this, and try to hold people. But they're doing it anyway with bail. But it's an important just point. I don't take it away. And so what happened was, one of the issues was the bias of the risk assessment tools. And so with Ella Baker, and I think you were part of that, Jessica, and a few others, we passed a bill the next year. I talked to Gavin Newsom, was the very first press conference on bail, has been a great advocate and part of this since ground zero when he was lieutenant governor, that said, you've got to look at bias of these assessment tools. Now, we only looked at the 47 counties that we have because we couldn't touch the referendum. Under the law, you can't mess with that. So we've done that, and that's a big piece, looking at judges, looking at if there's bias, looking at patterns. But there is no question, just like there was no question in the last 30 or 40 years how the industry's changed. There's so many areas of the law. That's why we exist as a legislature. I've already been in discussions with a number of very brilliant advocates who've pointed out some interesting issues relates to this that have caught my attention. And so if it passes, then, you know, I'm committed to keep making it work better, to fix it and fix it and fix it until I can't fix it anymore. And we have to pass it on to somebody else who's going to do the work. So I'm committed to that. The only thing that concerns me is, and this is a really critical point, understand that the legislative branch, the governor, and the judicial branch came together and said, this is what we want to do to eliminate money bail. These bail people came along, but we have a referendum which allows somebody to go out and collect signatures, lied to people in gathering signatures, put $4 million up, and now basically has stopped the referendum when it was supposed to go into effect last year up until the election. By them stopping that, it allows them to continue to make money, because when you have a referendum, the effect of the referendum is it stops the implication, the law from going into effect. So if they're making $560 million a year, it was suggested, as you suggested, they're making $560 million a year for this time too. And it, you know, for more than that, because a year and a half, probably making close to $1 billion that they made. So they put up a few $1 million. They're spending $2.5 million a month. They're putting in these guys, these insurance companies and bail companies to fight this bill, because it's just money thing. But here's the important point. There's a question, if the voters vote on a referendum, and this is the point that goes to the exact issue of whether we want to fix this or not. The voters vote and say, we're going to turn down and we're going to vote no on Prop 25 instead of voting yes. There's a question of what's the impact. If we then go and say, okay, some advocates have said, look, there's some needs to be fixed. Perfect is the enemy of the good, whatever Esteban said, and we're going to try to fix it. There's an argument that can be made that you can't make those changes because the voters have spoken. So now we're in a situation where not only have we not moved the law way down the line, gotten rid of the bail industry, and put ourselves in a position, we may be barred from making any changes because the voters have spoken on bail reform. Talk about an injustice on top of an injustice that's paid for by an industry out of their profits that they're making off the backs of poor people. I mean, it's painful to even think about.
Senator, let me,
I want to.
what does,
Oh,
wait, let me specifically, first, what does Prop 36 do?
SB 36.
I'm sorry, Senate Bill 36 from 2000.
Senate Bill 36 basically requires any one of the counties that's using an assessment tool to collect data to determine whether there's bias. It does it through a number of different mechanisms because there's a legitimate argument that people on these assessment tools, one of the examples is if you live in an over-policed community, there's odds are you might get arrested. They look at arrest records, then they're going to say, oh my God, this hurts Black and brown people in a way that's unfair. That's the argument against risk assessment tools, and they're looking at some factors that are wrong. So what we're trying to do, it basically is a data collection bill that determines whether judges, counties, the nature of the crimes, how that tool is being utilized to see if it's being used in a biased manner against the community. That's what it does. And then that'll give information to us as legislators going forward of what kinds of changes we need to make to prove the bias.
Thank you, Senator Esteban. Is that information public, though? Will that information be public? Where
all transparent, all public, everything's public.
This is the part that I think, one second, Esteban, I think many of our advocates and people that don't realize this, literally anyone that uses this assessment tool, any court uses this assessment tool, has to report out all of this data that's collected. I think you told me it was over 100 different data points. And it goes to the state legislature, and then it's public information. So then us as advocates can say, look, this is a crappy piece of assessment tool. We want to change it. Here's the information. This is why the law was put in effect, and we do what we do. And this was the part when we talk about commitment. Just want to say this last part. When we passed Senate Bill 260, Youth for Offender Parole, everybody said it didn't go far enough. It was not good law because it only affected juveniles. 2 years later, we came back and passed 261, which pushed the age limit up to 23. People still say, but that doesn't match the brain science, which demonstrates that people up to the age of 26, brains are still developing. We came back a third time, passed AB 1308, and now the law stands. Didn't happen the first time, but now we have the law that we wanted, but we had to come back and adjust it. So I just wanted to point that out, just as with bail, this might not be perfect, but we have the power of advocates to be able to support our electeds, such as Senator Hertzberg, to make this law the way we want it to be. Esteban, you want to share something?
You know, Senator Hertzberg kind of spoke a little bit about it, but I just want to really dive in on the political ramifications should this fail. He spoke to the referendum, and like, I just want to break down what the referendum means. Like, so if the referendum is essentially California voters challenging the legislative body, right? Like, we've been so successful on criminal justice reforms. Mind you, like, let's not forget where we came from 5-10 years ago, right? Like, let's not forget how hard it was to pass. I mean, SB 9 took 7 years to pass, right? And ended juvenile LWOP. And so we've been successful because Prop 47, Prop 57 have shown the legislative body in general, California voters support criminal justice reform. If this referendum fails, that sends a very different message to California legislators. One, in fact, that says California voters think we are going too far with criminal justice reform. I will tell you, all that does is give an out to the moderate Democrats who are already hard as shit to get to vote on our stuff, like on the most simple measures. And what you're doing is you're giving people an out, and you're saying you're allowing. I just think to think that you can roll the clock back politically, it's not the reality we should be living in. It's not the reality we actually live in. And I think we have to be very, very mindful of what that message really means. If there's I don't know, you know, I can speak from an advocate's perspective. I'll tell you right now, if this fails, I can't see the legislative body wanting to pass a comprehensive reform like this, at least in 10 years. At least the legislators that are elected now, I can't see them ever wanting to do something like this when we as a community aren't going to defend the victories that we have before us, right? Like, we're not defending them. And I will say it's a critique, and those who know me really well know I do hold myself to the standard, but I hold our community to the standard that we do have to support our champions in this realm. Like, they are not expendable. They are human beings. And I think what we're doing here is this is a means to rid a system of one that criminalizes poverty, one that like preys on people, it has a monetary value to freedom, like, and we're also not protecting our champions. Senator Hertzberg has worked on this. He's brought formerly incarcerated people to the table. He'll continue to do so. And I think to have a senator or legislator who has been so devoted to something really speaks lengths to their commitment. And I think, it's very rare that you have a legislator who is devoting themselves to a systemic overhaul. And yes, SB 10 isn't perfect, but as you can tell, the senators passed SB 36. I know there was another bill that you passed that has to do with insurance and immigrational rights. I can't really speak to that.
Well,
I'm
unfortunately,
sure
I didn't pass it. The rat finks knocked it out. The insurance industry killed me on it. Yeah, no, are you kidding? I was going after you. I wasn't stopping. I was hitting every angle I could hit, Go to war.
I mean, if you want to talk about it,
as long as I'm breathing, I'm fighting.
Yeah, I would love it if you could just, I think it's an excellent point that I was trying to make is just how it happens to the bill that you've brought 2 years now, that the bail industry and their humongous insurance backers oppose, and so they continue to kill that bill. But just as a reminder, this was Senator Hertzberg and every single progressive in the building. Every single progressive in the building. Why did they support this? Because they knew by eliminating the money bail and the tens of millions of dollars that those people take from poor people and communities of color, simply because they're overcriminalized, and put into their pockets and into their political apparatus. By doing that, by taking that stream of money into the Capitol away, we opened the door to more progressive criminal justice reform, like the one that the senator was trying to pass. And so, and in the floor debate, in the Senate and the Assembly, there were commitments from every single person who voted for this bill from the progressive angle to stand with us all in community until we get this right. And so I think you either believe in government or you don't. But if government says, hey, we're there until we get it done right. You've heard from Senator Hertzberg, you heard from every progressive who voted for this bill. We're there until we get it right. I think that commitment is there and you heard from Sam, Sam, I mean, I myself spent 15 years on a single campaign to end the use of, or the denial of food stamps and cash aid to people with a prior drug felony conviction. And that campaign was led by people who were impacted by that policy. You are looking at people who are gonna be here for the long haul. And I think that commitment has been there. And, but the long haul gets a lot easier when money bail, interest, and finances get out of the Capitol. And so, Senator, I don't know if you want to mention what it was you were trying to do and how they were able to kill it.
We're almost at time. And so I would definitely love to bring you back, Senator, but if you could just point out, because I know it was immigration that you were working on it, and if you could quickly share what you were attempting to pass on immigration. And real quick, Esteban, how much money has the bail industry poured into Norm 25? Do you know?
I haven't looked at the most recent numbers. I'm sure the senator knows because he probably checks it every morning.
I do. It's about 12, 13 million so far.
12 to 13 million.
And I want to put that into context. Like, we haven't even been able to raise $1 million for Prop 17, which restores the right to vote for people who have completed their prison sentence. So think about that. Like
12 to 13.
That shows what we're up against.
Exactly. And Senator Hertzberg, could you share quickly what was the bill you were working on immigration before?
Yeah, basically, for all bonds, what happens is if you get a credit card or buy a car or buy a house, there's consumer protection. But the bail industry, whether they're bail bonds or immigration bonds, say, oh, we're a different kind of company. We don't have any consumer protections. We can go into your homes. There's no Fourth Amendment rights. We can take your auntie's car if she signed a loan. We don't have to give notice. Basically, all we were doing was trying to apply the basic consumer protection laws for bail bonds and immigration bonds. And the insurance industry, I fought as hard as I know how to fight. And they just, rolled it in the committee, and I came back with the bill again this year, but couldn't move it again because of COVID. But they were able to, the power of the insurance committee of the insurance companies over the insurance committee killed something as simple as that. And that's what we're up against.
Thank you so much, Senator. So last thoughts for our panel. Could you take a minute and just last thoughts that you'd like to share with all of our listeners that are out there? Michael Mendoza.
Yeah, thank you. You know, just my last thoughts. You know, I think it was really said. It was an important thing that said earlier. It's been a long and hard fought battle just to get to this point. And a yes on Prop 25 is not only backing up our leadership in California, where we've had, I think it was more than 82% of our Democratic leadership passed SB 10. And we need to, like Esteban was saying, we need to back them up. A yes on Prop 25 is not only backing up our Democratic leadership, but it's ending money bail in California. We cannot lose sight of that.
Thank you, Michael. Jessica.
I am excited about implementing this policy. Voting yes on Prop 25 will reduce the jail size by a conservative estimated 170,000 people. It will make sure that people with very minor misdemeanors will never see a day in jail. They'll get a very quick, and out of there. And it will take the money that belongs in the community away from the money bail system, put it back in the community where it belongs so that they can meet their basic needs and ends their influence on our political decision-making. I'm excited about this proposition and I can't wait to go to the ballots and vote yes on Prop 25.
Esteban, thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for joining us. Esteban, last thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, I would say, a vote yes on Prop 25 is a vote to continue down a path of criminal justice reform, to allow our legislative body to feel encouraged and motivated to do so. A yes vote on Prop 25 is a vote to rid a system that profits over people and allows them to retain some monetary sense. I would say, honestly, like Prop 25, a yes vote also diminishes the cycle to a degree of human trafficking and the trauma that is associated to it. For when every bail agent takes a woman back to her pimp, we as a society are reinstilling that system. So a vote yes is a vote to diminish that system.
Thank you so much for joining us. Senator Hertzberg, last thoughts for our audience?
Justice. This is about justice. If there was ever a word, it's about justice. We have learned, we grow as a society, we'll continue to grow. We've learned that we need this to do the right thing. I just got a note from my dear friend, Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo, who's watching this now, who's a supporter of our team. She told me, yes, go for it. And so we got to fight. And it's what everybody has said. If we don't win this fight, it's going to be a huge setback. We're sticking our neck out. We got to win, and then we got to keep making it better. It's that simple. So please, a vote for Prop 25 is a vote for justice.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. My last thoughts. Thank you for our panel, these amazing human beings that have been doing this work for years to be able to make our system better. And on that point, I'd like to point out, in this time right now, when we hear everyone talking about systemic racism and changes systemically, this for California, from my humble opinion, is one of the biggest system changes that we can make right now. Literally, if you think in terms of Black history and going back to the Black codes, and if you know your history, and for those history teachers out there, the Black codes were instilled immediately after the end of the Civil War. 6 months later, the Constitution and 13th Amendment was added, which said that slavery was ended unless duly convicted of a crime. And with the Black codes basically said that if you were accused of vagrancy, you didn't have a job, and the job meant that you would have to work for a white person, they could pick you up, arrest you, and then basically re-enslave you. You would bond out, but you would have to bond out to work for someone for free. This in America, now bail goes back all the way to the King's time and the Queen's time in Europe. In America, in our country, Black codes is when it really started happening. Read your history and understand that the bail industry is one of those system changes. When we are talking about ending systemic racism, changing the system means that we need to, people say tear it down. We don't just tear it down, we have to come with something better. And we as advocates have continued in the past 10 years to make our criminal justice system a more equitable one with champions like Senator Hertzberg and many others that are in our state legislature. We need to have their back. We need to do this, make this better, and make it better for our people. I'll close with this. Thank you all. Next week, we'll be talking about Proposition 17, voting rights for people on parole. And the following Friday, we'll be talking about Prop 20, the attempt to roll back Proposition 57 and 47, also known as the Cooper Initiative. We will be talking about those things. Why is it important? We want to make sure that we get out there and vote, and we want to make sure that we continue to make our system better. I don't want it to be known as a criminal justice system. I want it to be known as a justice system that's equitable. Thank you all for joining. Take care. God bless and peace to all.